Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Risk with Dr. Naveen Agarwal. Each week, we talk about a topic related to risk management of medical devices in a very casual and informal way. This is not a webinar or lecture. Rather, our goal is to talk about key topics and challenges in a very informal way and share best practices. I'm your host, Naveen Agarwal, and I'm the principal and founder at Achieve, where my personal mission is to help you achieve success in risk management. In this episode, I'm joined by Sarah Panten to talk about clinical evaluation of medical devices and how best to integrate that as part of your risk management process. Clinical evaluation is a very important requirement in EU-MDR because it allows us to claim safety and effectiveness based on clinical evidence. In practice, it is very difficult to do because many times in the industry, it is done separate from risk management. So we are talking about challenges in current practice and sharing some best practices. We had this conversation as part of a LinkedIn live audio event in front of a live audience. You're about to hear a recording of our conversation. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. Hello, everyone, and welcome once again to our Friday Let's Talk Risk conversation. My name is Naveen Agarwal, and many of you know me well. I see many familiar faces in the audience today, but many of you are joining for the first time, so I welcome all of you. I hope you have a good time here today because this is going to be a very, very casual conversation. This is not a webinar. This is not a lecture. We are not talking about deep technical topics, but we are talking about very important topics. And the intent here is to have a good conversation. So after 15 minutes or so, I will actually invite you to participate. Those of you who have been here before know how it works. You just raise your hand virtually and be a part of this conversation. That's where actually you're going to have a lot of fun. It doesn't have to be a question. It can be a comment or your own view or perspective on the topic we are going to talk about. So folks, today I'm so excited to welcome Sarah Panten today. And this is going to be sort of a conversation in a series of conversations we have had about connecting clinical evaluation with risk management of medical devices. Now, this is a hot topic in Europe, and we have had 2 discussions on this topic before. You can find the recording and key highlights of those conversations on the Let's Talk Risk newsletter. But we're going to continue this chat today with Sarah, and I'm so excited. I can't wait to get going. So without further ado, I'm going to invite Sarah to introduce herself briefly, and we get going with that. So Sarah, welcome, and thank you for joining me today.
Oh, thank you so much, Naveen. I'm also very excited because, we can continue now to talk about all the interfaces between the processes that we have that you already started to discuss with Alexei and Florian, for example, who are really great industry colleagues, I would say. And we had a lot of discussions in the last months and years. And so maybe a few words about my background. So I'm a really passionate expert in the medical device industry, and I started my career with the goal to bring innovative medical devices to the market, right? And now, at the moment, we have a situation in Europe where with the MDR, it's more and more difficult to bring new devices to the market, and we have more and more requirements for clinical evaluations, for example. And without the proper clinical evaluation nowadays, you just can't bring innovative devices to the market. And honestly, I'm a bit frustrated now because everyone is only focusing on we have to fulfill those regulatory requirements. But I think we also lost track for what makes sense to do in order to develop great devices here, right? And it was discussed before that we have to bring together the different disciplines that we have. So product development, risk management, clinical evaluation, and in particular also post-market surveillance. And, I was writing a lot of clinical evaluations starting in 2010. And typically in the past, we had the situation that before you wanted to bring a medical device to the market, someone said, oh, we need a clinical evaluation. Who can write it? And, it was one document. It was a report where we collected all the data at that point. And the requirement that we have to consider risk management was also not really new. And what happened in the past is that we asked the risk management team to provide us the risk analysis, and then we get a document with typically an Excel file with hundreds of lines with information. And, I was sitting in front of these documents and was thinking, okay, what is now the relevant information for me and the clinical evaluation? And that was the starting point where I thought, okay, how can we connect those processes, and can we define a term maybe called clinical risk so that we use a categorization in the risk analysis that helps the clinical evaluation expert to find the information that we really need in the clinical evaluation.
Got you.
And I discussed the topic also with the TÜV experts and other experts in the industry, and it seems that no one has really a good explanation and a clear definition of this interface.
Yes. And I remember the LinkedIn post that you shared was almost like a viral post. It hit the point hard that we're really missing this terminology from our vocabulary. And look, we are not able to really synthesize this information to present in a kind of succinct way to show that the device is safe and effective. That's what we are trying to do, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Sarah, before we go any further, I know there are many people who join this forum who are outside of the medical device industry because we talk about risk. Can you start with just talking simply what clinical evaluation is?
So according to the definition that we have in Europe, the clinical evaluation is the collection of clinical data and then the assessment of relevance and quality and the detailed analysis of single statements in those data sets in order to achieve a conclusion if we really fulfill safety, performance, and benefit aspects. And in Europe, it's really crucial that you have clinical evidence to demonstrate that you fulfill the general safety and performance requirements that we have here. So without clinical data, no chance to bring a medical device to the market.
Yeah, because we are trying to make a statement that, look, the device we have worked so hard to build, it's going to help patients while not exposing them to unnecessary risk. We are making a statement through this evaluation, right? That's a big picture, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. And the interesting thing is the risk-benefit assessment is not really new, and it was defined in the ISO 4971 for quite a while and in European law as well. But how do you really assess a benefit? And how you do that weighting, right?
Yes.
We do not have answers for that at the moment.
Yes. So, in the 2019 revision of ISO 14971 is for the first time that they define the term benefit. Right, so it's kind of, so it's a new to our terminology, although we were supposed to look at benefits. But, people get confused. Hey, marketing talks about benefits, clinical people talk about benefits, quality people talk about benefits. So everybody talks about benefits, but really what we are talking about here, Sarah, I think, clinical benefit. How does it help improve the medical condition for the patient in the context of the intended use? Is that not right?
Yeah, it is right. And also important is how can you demonstrate that you really fulfill the benefit, right? Yeah,
it's not like just hand waving and a fancy argument. Like it's not like a nice slide that you might see, but what's the clinical evidence?
Exactly.
And I what I'm hearing you say is that clinical evaluation is the process of gathering that clinical evidence, correct?
Exactly, that's the point.
So guys, I like to make things simple, right? I know we get hung up on terminology and vocabulary, but simply, this cannot be like check the box activity. This has to be done upfront, early on, as soon as possible in the design and development, and have a strategy for generating this evidence, right?
Yeah, it is. And also important at the beginning is, let's say, identification and definition of the benefit that you really want to achieve. And a lot of companies haven't thought about that in the past, maybe because they just improved existing devices. I don't know. But honestly, as a company, when I spend a lot of money to bring a medical device into the market, I think I want to be better than the other devices that are already in the market, right?
Yeah, sure. And of course, marketing will talk about that, but we are talking about clinical benefit. Right? We are talking about improving what's out there in terms of clinical benefits so that we can claim that our intended use is sound and valid and we should be granted permission to market this product. That's what it's all about. So I think we already found one connection, right? The clinical evaluation needs to start early in the design and development, not when we are compiling our documentation for submission.
Yeah, that's true. You have to plan your activities and integrate it into your product development activities. So in the product development plan, you also should integrate clinical activities.
So what are the points that you can talk about, connecting points with risk management, Sarah, where you think we are missing this connection for clinical evaluation?
Well, I think we have talked about before, and Alexei and Florian mentioned it. When I discussed with them the interfaces between the processes, and especially aspects like acceptance criteria for the safety, for the performance, and of course for the clinical benefit, we found out that at the beginning, we have to look at the state of the art that we achieve with the device, right? And how do you define the state of the art? And interesting is that there is a definition for that in different standards that we have for quite a while. And the MDR mentions that you have to consider alternative treatment options, for example. But when we talk about it, we often say state of the art. But basically, we have two different components here. We have a medical state of the art, should be discussed and documented by the clinical experts here. And then we also have a technical state of the art. And who is responsible for that? Is it risk? Is it product development? Who defines it and who documents it?
Very interesting. I've never heard this put this way. This is awesome. So tell me a little bit more about the difference between medical and technical state of the art in your mind.
Yeah, in the medical device regulation in Europe, there is a requirement that we have to consider these alternative treatment options, so different alternatives for diagnosis or therapy here. And this is, it is kind of new because, in the past, we could bring medical devices to the market that were safe. But typically, as a company, when we wrote clinical evaluations, we haven't focused on those different alternative treatment options. So we just said, hey, this is an endoscope. It works like other endoscopes. But we haven't questioned if the procedure, the intended indication is really appropriate, or if there maybe is a completely different technical or medical option here, right? And how do we do that? How do we define the medical state of the art? We do a lot of research. So we search for medical guidelines from medical associations here. We do scientific literature searches in databases like PubMed or Embase, for example. So we go to medical congresses as product managers, and we want to understand what is discussed in the medical community. And all of this information is input for our state of the art that we write. But how do you define the technical state of the art?
Interesting. So all this market research will tell us what else is out there which is providing the clinical benefits we want to aim for, and how much better can we be, right? I think that's the whole conversation. It's a relative benefit to the state of the art out there from a medical point of view.
Yes. Yeah,
that's one way of looking at it, right? I think that's interesting. So, Sarah, before I invite folks to participate, I have one more question for you because I think it's relevant. And in my experience, where I have seen a miss is in post-market surveillance, where I think, personally, from my experience, that we have limited focus on clinical aspects of our post-market. Do you share this experience, first of all? Just to ask you, what is happening in the post-market space and clinical evaluation?
Yeah, that's a good point. We are in Europe required to further collect clinical data throughout the whole life cycle of a medical device. And that includes data related to the state of the art. And the state of the art can change over time as well. So there will be maybe new technology in the future, and that might be better and provide higher benefits for patients. And how can you monitor that if you do not collect clinical data, right? And it is collected as part of post-market surveillance activities.
Yeah, and what I've seen though is that it's done separately, and it's not kind of integrated together to make a sort of conclusive statement about benefit risk on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to open this up, and guys, this will be the first question for you or comments to share. What is your experience about missing connections between clinical evaluation and risk management? So the floor is open. You guys hopefully know how to indicate to me whether you are interested or not. You have to find these 3 dots next to your profile and just request to speak. So I'm going to wait for you guys to raise your hands. Don't be shy and don't wait. As soon as possible, raise your hand. I know David is requesting, but anyone else who is interested in participating, please go ahead and let me know. I'll bring you on stage. So David, you are on. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Thank you, Naveen. And thank you, Sarah. Fascinating topic. I'm a novice. I'm not technical. I have a two-part question. You were talking about medical state-of-the-art, technical state-of-the-art. Is there potentially another one that, if you think of the bigger system as a whole, more of an enterprise approach? And then how do you combine data with more analog type information?
Interesting.
What do you consider analog type of information here?
Anything that's not data, I guess. Probabilistic or opinions or, many experts that have many years of experience have very strong opinions on things. I'm just curious how that all fits in.
Yeah, okay, I see your point. From my perspective, it's all data because when I document it, it's kind of data that it has.
Yes.
With. Yeah, good point. So as part of the clinical evaluation, we also should consider that. And in Europe, there is this requirement to proactively collect data from the market. And a lot of companies have started to do, we call it post-market surveillance studies, or do customer questionnaires to really collect the data and to collect information. And when it's documented, then we have data, right?
Mm-hmm. I see. And to your point, Sarah, we need to be talking to doctors. We need to be talking to patients. We need to be gathering information from social media about the experience with our device. And David, to your point, it has to somehow come into our organization in a systematic way that can be analyzed and evaluated to make decisions. We have to build those systems. Guys, we're going to continue our conversation, but the floor is open. And I know there are over 50 people listening, so you can't all be just be on the sideline. You have to participate. And this is one of those things where I may have to start calling on names. So we have done it many times. Don't be shy. This is going to be a very, very casual conversation. Ed, you are on. Please share what you have in mind. Ed, can you hear me?
Unmute. There we go. Am I on now?
Yes, you're on. Welcome, Ed. How are you?
Okay. Unfortunately, I missed a large part of the conversation because I was on a conference call with a couple other people from this group. But the topic of the post-market surveillance came up, and we're talking about risk. And the requirement in 14971 is that you have an active process to collect and review information. That's in 10.1 in the first sentence. So we aligned the standards, Sarah, with the MDR and what was going on there when we developed the 2019 version. So we expect worldwide that manufacturers will have an active process to go out and seek data. And there's even some suggestions of some sources of data that you can use. And it goes further because the source document for the production and post-production activities, which is what we call post-market surveillance, I guess as you might say, and it crosses the line. It's not just post-market, but it's also during production.
Yeah.
That was the GHTF CAPA guidance, which is the same document that was used for 13485 for their Clause 8, which is monitoring and improvement. And they're saying the same thing, basically. It's just you need to have an active process. So it's not just Europe. It is now worldwide. That you need to have those processes in place.
So the good point here, Ed, I think is that even the standards are kind of sort of coming to terms with this idea of going out and learning more about your product, and whether it's QMS standard, whether it's ISO 14971. I love it that we seem to be speaking the same language. So I really appreciate you bringing that up. So hang in there. We'll have more chat, more conversation on this, but I want to invite now Rajat, who is from the aerospace industry, and I would love to hear your perspective on safety, on gathering information from, post-production, post-market? How do you guys do it? And if you have any other thoughts to share, Rajat, go ahead and please unmute yourself.
Yeah, thank you, Naveen. And I've been meaning to join you in some of these Let's Talk Risk, talk show, I guess this is. So wonderful to join you finally. And I'm learning a lot. So my kind of question kind of comes with the fact that I want to learn more about the same clinical risks, but in the space station. So like microgravity environments. And I think that maybe these kind of post-market surveillance, it is much more easier when it's a contained environment like the International Space Station. So I've been kind of trying to understand some of these risks for a life support system design, they call it. But I just had to ask you guys, like, how do I get started with the standards? Like, what are the standards? Is there anything to get started with? And are there any microgravity considerations in any of your systems yet?
Oh my gosh, this is so fascinating, Rajat. Thanks for sharing. Sarah, do you have any insights on where he could get going with just understanding what should be done, how to gather information, what are the best practices from a clinical point of view?
That's a good question. Well, when we talk about standards in the medical device industry, it's definitely ISO 14971, right? And when we talk about collection of data from the post-market system, I think everything that we have in the medical device industry is very specific for our industry. So I'm not sure if it would be helpful for your industry.
But what I'm hearing Rajat say is that, hey, health of astronauts in space station is important to us. And
and it includes all clinical requirements. So I'm just here to learn about how we do it on Earth so that I can probably see how to take it to space, right?
That's wonderful, wonderful. So Rajat, I think you bring up a good point, and I think we're going to do a little bit thinking about this and follow up with more discussions. I've taken a note of it, and this is what I love about this conversation, guys, right? Because we are really exploring interesting topics. So just hold that thought. Tom, you've been waiting patiently, so I'm going to invite you to unmute your mic and share your thoughts. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Naveen. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you. How? Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. It feels a little bit like saying a long-time listener, first-time caller. I thought I'd just take the opportunity, given that there's some fantastic people on the call, something that always strikes me about risk management in the medical device world and the application of 14971 is that we can still, even today, be somewhat siloed between the world of 14971, which, I guess from my perspective would often have a design focus. And then we have the world of, in Europe at least, clinical evaluation, where we now have quite detailed processes for how you evaluate clinical risk. I'd just be really interested to hear from yourself or people on the call, what does good or what does best look like for how we try to get clinical validation for the tools we use in the risk management world for managing risk? Has anyone seen a really good or, ideally clinically valid way or scientifically valid way that we could do this so that we, reduce the risk of different solutions being adopted for the same technology?
That's a very awesome question. And Sarah, I'm going to let you start first, but the question is open to everybody on the panel here. But Sarah, go ahead. Please share your thoughts.
Well, I'm always struggling a bit when we use the term validation, because for me, it's validation means product validation. So is it really the right device that was developed for the defined patient population and user group here? And I don't know if it is in the US. I mean, for PMAs, it's quite clear, but in Europe, we do not have a specific submission way where you need clinical trials, but we see a lot more trials, not only for the submission to get market access, but also after the device was brought to the market. So those post-market clinical follow-up studies.
So what I'm hearing in Tom's question is, what are some best practices to actually gather evidence in a way which can be supported, which can be believed, and it's not like speculative? I think that's what I'm hearing. And I would say, Tom, it applies to anything that we do, right? We should have a scientific approach. We should have as much as possible a statistically valid way of analyzing data and coming to our conclusions. So I think those best practices are not different from anything else we do.
And maybe one comment. This is what I said, what I meant when I said we need to do trials, or we have to collect the data in a systematically way. So this is definitely considered as best practice here.
So one thing I can share with you guys is that I've been reading, and in the US at least, we have this information available. Every PMA, every 510K, you can go and look up the information published by FDA. I've looked at summary of safety and effectiveness data. That's a great summary. Look at the clinical trials that they do, because they describe their endpoints, they describe the statistical methodology they're going to use. We can learn a lot from that, and that is out there for public to look at. So, Tom, does that answer your question? I want to give you an opportunity to see if you have a follow-up on that.
Yeah, no, thank you, Naveen. Yeah, I guess, I've heard people think about this in a couple of different ways, one of which was, I heard an interesting suggestion once that in the way that we calculate severity and occurrence when we're describing risk estimates, and then you control the risk, people have thought, could you do that for benefit? And how might you do that for clinical benefit? Because in the, the world of clinical evaluation, clinical studies, and to doctors, they have an entirely different way of thinking about these overall benefit risk assessments. So I haven't kind of seen anyone been able to create a ledger that's as valid on the benefit side as it is on the risk. But
it is. I think, Tom, what I would recommend that you review some of the PMA information, because the way clinical studies are designed, they actually describe what the clinical endpoint would be, how would it be measured, what will be something that they'll compare it with. There's a lot of good information there. So I know we have two more folks here, and we are kind of running short on time. So I'm going to give Richard an opportunity to share his thoughts. You've been waiting for some time, Richard. I appreciate your patience. Please unmute your mic and share what you have in mind.
Hi, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Great. I got it right on the first time. I was actually just responding to Rajath. Sorry if I pronounced your name wrong. But on your inquiry, one of the things with medical devices is that we never really get, prescriptive information on how we answer things like clinical benefits. But one of the tools that you should get directed towards to help you with your specific question is in ISO TR 24971, which is a guidance document supporting 14971. And there's Annex A. It's called Identification of Hazards and Characteristics for Safety, I think, or I'm probably misquoting it, but it's a set of a bunch of questions that helps you characterize what your device is, or in your case, you could characterize it based on what your problem is. And it really helps you start to scope in the unique features to your problem, or, in our industry, to your device. And, those of us in consulting, oftentimes we get partnered up with new products and new projects of which we don't often have a lot of experience in. And that first step, by answering the questions in that annex, really helps start to scope out what are the unique risks with your product.
That is a great suggestion, Richard. Thank you for bringing this up. And essentially, you are right. These are a series of questions designed to help us understand what the characteristics related to safety are, because guess what's going to happen? It's going to help us understand hazards and also define maybe safety limits on important performance characteristics. So that's great. Thank you for bringing that up. Vikas, I see you have joined us, so I'm going to let you share what you have in mind. Please go ahead and unmute your mic.
Yes, thanks for this interesting talk. I have just a remark, or rather a very naive question. When we think from a risk management perspective, how can we correlate this clinical analysis would lead us to identify acceptable or unacceptable risk, or let's say the resulting risk has avoidable consequences or unavoidable consequences? Or can we categorize the clinical analysis is a part of the, or one of the method of risk assessment? And also, how can we exactly and accurately categorize the different occurrence rankings and severity rankings?
Got you. So,
for example,
just to understand.
For example,
go ahead, please. Go ahead. Keep going.
Yeah. For example, if there is a scratch caused due to some hazard, due to the medical device, does the scratch is going to lead to some avoidable consequences or unavoidable consequences? Unavoidable consequences might be the scratch would lead to some kind of further infection, and it will lead to some kind of amputation or organ damage.
So because I'm hearing two questions in here. One question is about acceptability of risk, and I know we are running short on time, so I'm going to summarize it very, very quickly. I'm hearing two questions. One is about acceptability, and that is done in the context of benefits of the intended use. So ISO TR 24971 was brought up. Please review that. A lot of good information there. The second question is about building sequence of events from a starting event that will lead to potential hazardous situations and harms. And again, I would recommend you to please go and review TR 24971. So sorry to cut you short, but I know we are running short on time, and I respect people's time, especially on Friday afternoon. Before I give Sarah a chance to share some closing thoughts, guys, I'm going to share with you only a few housekeeping points. This is a 30-minute rapid-fire type of a conversation, but this is not the only time we do it. Every Friday at 11 Eastern, we get together. And I invite you, block your calendar if you love these, tell your friends, and just show up. We're going to talk about risk in a very casual way. If you miss it, any of these conversations, if you miss it, a recording with some key points are available on the Let's Talk Risk newsletter. And in the event description, if you go to the event page, you will find a link to subscribe to that newsletter. You can keep in touch. Finally, I want to invite all of you to raise your hand and tell me if you are interested in being a guest on this conversation. No preparation required. It's very, very casual and fun. And I know all of you have something to share, some interesting ideas, some interesting piece of advice that we can take away with. So get in touch with me through LinkedIn or any other way and let me know if you would be interested. And I'll be very happy to coordinate with you. Sarah, what a conversation we had, and high energy. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. I would just invite you to share any closing comments, any thoughts that you have for us.
Yeah, what I think is really important that we also exchange ideas and concepts from regulatory requirements in, Europe and the US, because what I've heard, for example, the topic about acceptance criteria and so on, we cover that with the clinical evaluation in Europe. It's a defined process, and think about the role of the state of the art that we have, and vice versa. The FDA has a pretty good guidance for benefit risk assessment that we could use in Europe. So exchange of different perspectives is very important. And what I also think is that we in our industry have to discuss and solve the regulatory questions that we have. We shouldn't wait for another guidance in Europe or the FDA or wherever we have it. But let's discuss it and let's try to find together a solution, a best practice approach, because we have 500 or more than 500,000 different medical devices on the market. And one approach that works for one device might not work for the other one. So we need this exchange, we need a discussion.
I love it. And that's where we are trying to kind of build this sort of forum and community. So all of you guys are being part of this conversation. I just enjoy this. I love engaging with you, and I invite you to be a part of this. Reach out to anybody. Reach out to Sarah. Reach out to anybody who is on this audience today or who joined us on this stage. Connect with them. Introduce yourself. Please don't spam anybody, okay? No spam, please. But you can connect with anybody, build new relationships, and have this conversation because, like Sarah is saying, why wait for some guidance to come out? Let's do it ourselves. With that, guys, thank you so much. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you everybody who participated. Thank you all for joining today, and I look forward to connecting with you next week. Have a good weekend, and please share what you have in mind anytime. Reach out anytime. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you again. Bye-bye.